Our scripture reading today comes from Luke 19, 1 through 10. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who this Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He is gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." Here's the word of God.
Well, good morning. Good morning. Those that are visiting, I'm Pastor Jonathan, and I'm privileged to be here most Sundays, and just always a pleasure to be with you. For those that are here today, I do want to let you know, thank you, because I know you stayed up late watching that Ohio State game. Right? I know. There's maybe a couple people, I'm looking around and I'm wondering, it's maybe a little too late for them. But I do want to just welcome everybody here again to this service. And for those that are joining us online, I want to say hello to you. And those that will watch this later on DVD, we want to say hello to you as well. And thanks for being part of us, of our worship service with us here today. You want to also mention that this is the second part of a 2-week sermon series. And so if you weren't here for the first part, don't worry about it too much, because the name of the sermon series is called Sycamore. And if you weren't here last time, or if you were here last time, you're still clueless. You have no clue why this is named Sycamore until today. So actually, for those that missed the first part of this, don't worry too much. I'll catch you up very quickly. And the story that you missed was Jesus is entering Jericho. This is right before he's about to go up for the Passion narrative, where he goes up for the final time to Jerusalem. He's entering Jericho because that's one of the ways you got to Jerusalem. And it's the pit stop that you're supposed to stop at. And as he comes, he's on the road to go in, and there's a blind beggar, and he heals the blind beggar, and all the people go, "Yay! Praise God." For this blind beggar that was being this person that was in need and all the stuff, they see God do this amazing thing, this person that they've seen on the side of the road over and over and over, and the story ends with praising God. What you may not name, what you may not know is that story is closely linked with the story that happens today. So let us pray. Lord, as we gather together, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Well, I know many of you remember a guy named Donald Gould. Do you remember this name? Anybody? Donald Gould. He was a piano player, and in 2016 he was offered a record deal. Now you may remember the story because he was homeless. Remember the story from Sarasota, Florida, not so long ago? And you remember what happened, right? And it hit YouTube, went viral, and the record deal came, and there were all these interviews afterwards, and it just made you feel good, didn't it? It just made you feel just wonderful about this homeless man that, probably had been going through some bad times, and all of a sudden something really great happens. Well, that's the feeling that the crowd had when this blind beggar was healed and received his sight. Same feeling. But, stop for a minute. What about the villains in our society? What about the people you don't like? Right? And I know I think about the last, only so old, and I remember the last 3 presidents. There was always somebody that didn't like the last 3 presidents, right? So whether Donald Trump or Obama or Bush before him, right? There was always a crowd of people that this was the enemy, right? So if you fall into one of those camps, this story is you can kind of really identify with this. Because imagine that president, Jesus came up to that president and said, "I'm going to stay at your house today, and I'm going to bring salvation to your arch enemy," right? So, not quite someone like the Taliban, but someone that you have a whole bunch of bad stuff against, right? Like someone that is, you would call them an enemy. Someone that you would say, yeah, I don't necessarily want to, just see them gone from the face of the earth, but I really don't want them to have power, and especially have power over me. and Jesus would offer grace to them, how would you feel? It's a struggle, isn't it? Yeah, it is. It's a struggle. And if you're not all political, you can insert someone like that, whether it's a celebrity or someone like that, that you know. What's funny about the story that we read today, that's exactly what's going on. Jesus, as I mentioned before, this story is closely linked with the blind beggar. And the reason why we never think about that is because the blind beggar happens in chapter 18, and the story of Zacchaeus happens in chapter 19. And the reason for that is because in basically the 300s, the 4th century, they started going through the Bible and saying, hey, it'd be really neat if we could figure out a way to order the verse number so you can find it real quickly when you're talking with somebody about the gospel or you're talking about scripture. So they went through, they ordered the whole entire Bible and gave it chapter numbers and verse numbers. And when they did that, they didn't always put the chapter divisions in the right place. And today is one of those examples where actually I would argue they didn't do it right. Right? So don't get tied up in the fact that one happens in 18, one happens in 19, and we naturally dissect these two stories. They're both revolve around Jerusalem. Not Jerusalem, Jericho that is. They both involve a person that is an outcast in society. They both involve Jesus, who should have walked right past them, and he stopped. And they both involve Jesus bringing salvation to two opposite ends of the spectrum. One, the oppressed, and one, the oppressor. And here's sort of the story to just kind of delve into it once again. As we're coming in, Jesus, of course, it says, we remember this last week, I just want to back up, that when Jesus entered Jericho, remember the crowd comes out to meet him. And they find the blind beggar on the way into Jericho. And the idea is that, Jesus, you're going to come to our banquet. This is Middle Eastern hospitality, so they have arranged for Jesus. They know he's coming. They've gone out to give him great honor. There's like a parade coming into town. It's expected that someone in the community who has a really nice place, really good food, really great servants is going to host Jesus for a big banquet, and they're going to celebrate him and do all these different things. He's going to teach and do all this stuff, and they're going to show Middle Eastern hospitality and earn credit to their community for showing great hospitality to such a great honored man. Now, if you look really carefully at this story, did you notice what it says? I just want to point this out for you. Because here's how the story here's how the story starts in chapter 19. Jesus entered Jericho. Okay, everything's great, everything's going well. And what's the next word? And was passing through. Imagine you set up a big, banquet for Jesus, and Jesus is like, oh, I'm going to get going. Right? So this is already sort of a slap in the face to Jericho, right? I mean, if you think about the people, they're already kind of miffed at this. We're praising God for the blind beggar, but as he leaves and he's passing through, he's not even stopping for the banquet, the whole community has sort of had this kind of that deflated balloon feel. You can kind of imagine, right? Oh. Of course, Jesus is going to make matters worse. Jesus doesn't always play nice. Sometimes he doesn't do what you want him to do, right? And so there is a man, you can imagine these great crowds in the streets, and it talks about this man named Zacchaeus. And there are three things that are mentioned about him that are very important. Now, the first is that he was a tax collector. The second thing is this, that he's a chief tax collector. And the third thing that's really important about this story is that it says that he was wealthy. Now, of course, you all remember the fourth thing about Zacchaeus. He was what? Short. And of course, there's that Bible song, right? Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was... You knew it was going to happen. You just knew it. You church people knew it was going to happen, right? And I'm surprised we didn't join in chorus there, Round Robin, or whatever is going on there. But it mentioned those three things. Now, those three things are important. The short thing is really easy to understand the story. He's short. They're pressing crowds. He can't see over the crowds. Now, he doesn't want to push his way through the crowds because of this. He's a tax collector. He's a chief tax collector. He's wealthy. And the reason for that is how Rome did their taxation was this. They let people farm it out, if you will. And so you would get the rights to tax a certain area. And Rome would basically talk in secret with you. Here's what we expect you to raise. Here's just the final amount. We don't care how you get it, just get it and give it to us. But the general population didn't know what that amount was. See what I'm saying? So the tax collector, his job was to go around, collect tax from you, so that ultimately Rome could be paid, and how he got paid was however much extra he could skim off that went to his pockets. And no one knows, right? Well, very few people would actually ever know what that amount was. I mean, imagine that in our society. You used car dealer, right? No, just kidding. Right? But imagine that in our society, right? You can imagine what would happen, right? If this system was set up, there would be some people that were rich, and not only were they rich, they would be fighting for the enemy, if you will. They're collaborating with Rome, right? And my wife is like, you know I sell used cars, right? Like, I was trying not to look at you, but you kept it going. So, the Lord loves everybody, as we see. Right? I don't know if I'm going to be able to recover from that one, I'm sorry. So he is a tax collector, right? Boo, working with the enemy, cheating us out of money. He's the chief tax collector, so he's in charge of this whole ring, this whole little, like, I mean, you can almost think of it like a mafia, if you will, almost on this town, right? He's the chief person, and then not only that, he's wealthy, which the Bible is very specific to tell us that he's wealthy. How did he get wealthy? Cheated all his fellow people, and he got it good, right? He's got it good. So you can imagine in Middle Eastern society, if this man was someone of honor, even in the crowds, people would have just moved out of his way and let him just walk up and see Jesus. The crowd doesn't. Right? The crowd's there. And if you're this type of person, imagine how hated this person was, right? Back in the day, if you were in a crowd like this, you'd be really careful if you were hated, because there were these people called the Sycamore, and they were revolutionary people, and they were known for that because the name for dagger, a really big dagger, was the Sycamore. And so they named them the daggers, because what their job was to do is to go assassinate people. That's what they did with their life. And someone like Zacchaeus is high crime target, so he can't mingle with the crowds, he can't push his way forward, he can't do any of this. And he wants to see Jesus so bad, he does two outlandish things. Now, we don't really pick up on this because in our culture it doesn't necessarily happen, but in Middle Eastern culture, if you're a man, and a respected man especially, if you're a wealthy man especially, if you're someone of importance, you don't run. You never see it. And in fact, it's kind of like, it's kind of a way of shaming yourself to the public. And so when Jesus, tells the story of the prodigal son, you remember that the father gets up and runs. There's something meaningful there in that story. An emptying of oneself is saying, I am going to let myself be shamed to accomplish my goal. And so Zacchaeus, what does he do? He runs ahead of the crowd. And so you can imagine, like, watching, whatever enemy you have in your mind, just want to give you a mental image. Imagine they're wearing a Speedo, right? And how shameful that is. Now, if you're a Speedo wearer, I'm sorry, but you're wrong, right? But imagine how shameful that is, right? And this is a culture, you don't do that. You bring shame upon yourself if you do that. Well, this is the same thing. He is running, and the whole crowd is going, isn't that Zacchaeus running? Right? And you can see the crowd, right, just laughing at him, making a hysterical mockery of him, saying, what is that guy doing? And then he does the second thing. He climbs a tree. Also a big no-no in Middle Eastern culture. Matter of fact, I was reading a story about, I think his name was John Bedou, and I don't know how to pronounce it quite right, but he was one of the American ambassadors to Egypt about the time of the Kennedys, John Kennedy and all that, and Nasser was the president of Egypt at the time, and he was hosting a party at John was hosting the party, our ambassador, at the ambassador house, and he wanted to string some lights up, so he climbed a tree and strung up the lights and came down. Well, the next time he was with the President Nasser stopped their conversation and asked about, is it true? Did you really climb a tree? Because that was so ridiculous, even nowadays, at our time. It was unbelievable. As a man, you just don't do that. As a respected man, you don't climb trees. This is Zacchaeus, he runs along, and he climbs a tree. So he's desperate to see Jesus. This is a whole self-emptying, whole self, avowing, I don't care what people think of me in a moment, I'm going to go find and see Jesus. But it's also interesting what kind of tree he climbs. Sycamore fig tree. Aha! It's coming along, isn't it? All right. So I promised last week that it would be explained why the sermon series was called Sycamore, and hopefully it sticks in your mind. And the reason why I chose that is because this story It's the only place in the whole New Testament where that word appears. Sycamore. And this is actually a story, as I've been explaining and we've been talking, and you can see it's kind of condensed. Luke's only giving you the bare details of some of the stuff, and he expects you to sort of fill in some of those other details of what's going on, right? And so as you hear this story, he goes out of his way to make sure you understand it's a sycamore. And the reason why is this. Because when Jesus goes through, and he actually passes through Jericho, and we know that because a sycamore tree was not allowed to be in the city. Sycamore trees, these fig trees, are big, huge trees, and they were known for being cultivated because they made really good wood beams for the roofs of houses. And so in this area, they would cultivate those, but you didn't do it in the city because A, they had really low branches, and there were really big trees that would grow, and they had foliage all over. And so they created a mess, so to speak, if you will, and so not only was it bad to clean up, but also trees were seen as tents, which is very important. Because if something unclean happened under a tent in the Old Testament, and we learn this in the law, and made it unclean, anybody who entered under that tent also became unclean. And so you didn't want a really big tree in the middle of your town, because if someone actually defiled underneath it, then if you walked underneath it haphazardly, you're now unclean. So not only did you have to clean it, not only was it a big, huge tree that you got to make space for all these things. So they actually did this. They would have it 25 yards away from the city. That was kind of the understood rule. And so this sycamore tree, when he runs ahead, he's not just running, a little bit and talking a little tree in town. He's actually running out of town, 25 yards, so a fourth of a football field at least, hops up a tree, makes a fool out of himself. And the other thing about sycamore tree, fig trees, that is, they have big, huge foliage. Why would he want that? He can hide. So he wants to sneak this peek at Jesus. He's willing to embarrass himself, but he's trying to make sure no one can see him. This is the image of what's going on with Zacchaeus. And of course, when Jesus goes through the city, and he's on the way out, and he's heading up to Jerusalem, you can feel the community, right? We threw a banquet for you, Jesus. And you're leaving. Everybody's just like, oh. The Price is Right, notice when you get it wrong. Oh, that's kind of the feeling of the crowd this day. And then he stops. It says he looks up to Zacchaeus, and he calls him. He says Zacchaeus. Now, if you stop and think about that, Jesus went through Jericho enough, so maybe he already knew the name of the chief tax collector. Maybe this is actually one of those God moments where, God, and Jesus is fully God, so he just goes, I know your name, you don't have to tell me. Maybe it's for that. Or maybe it's even a third option that's very, very likely as well. If he had run and climbed a tree, and somebody saw him do it, imagine this crowd, probably follows Jesus out for at least 25 yards. They're probably showing him honor as he leaves town as well. And they've probably seen, someone's probably ratted out Zacchaeus. And what happens in crowds when they're not happy and they need someone to blame? And if someone hated is doing something shameful. You can almost imagine this scenario. And Luke doesn't tell us which one of these scenarios it is, but here's a very likely scenario, is that Zacchaeus has climbed this tree and people are calling out names to them. When you get a big crowd, Zacchaeus doesn't know who it is that's calling him. So when you enter his office to pay taxes, you got to be all nice. But when you have this shot finally to take some, four-letter words and throw them out and say those to Zacchaeus, he's probably getting ridiculed. He's probably getting teased. He's probably getting, the community just uproar, almost a riot kind of going on. And they're taking out their anger that Jesus has gone through, placing on Zacchaeus, and their anger of being taxed and cheated all these years and taking out Zacchaeus. Again, we don't know if that's exactly how it goes because the way Gospel Luke tells it, but it is a very likely scenario. And whichever one of these is, the true thing is Zacchaeus has made a fool out of himself. He's going to be shamed by his community for many, many years to come. And Jesus does what? He stops under the tree. Takes that U-turn again, right? So I chose this because he's literally leaving Jericho, and he stops. He takes presence Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, come down. I must stay at your place tonight. And actually, he's saying lodging. So this isn't just I'm going to come to your house and have a meal and leave. This is I'm going to stay at your house. You're going to be the person hosting my meal. hosting me. The great honor of this community is now placed on you. In the community, do they clap? Do they praise God? Do they say, "Yay, Jesus"? What do? Yeah. They start making kind of mockery of Jesus. Now here's the thing you have to read very, very closely, because in the verses, verse 40, it says, Jesus stopped. I'm sorry, I put the wrong verse. When you get to chapter 19, and it says that all the people saw this and began to mutter. Well, one thing that they say is, he has gone. Now notice the tense there. He has gone. He has gone to be the guest of a sinner. Now what's important about that is, again, I told you Luke has sort of taken the story, taken a bunch out. I don't know if he was cramming the space, he was running out of, scroll space, and he was trying to get the story in, or what the deal is, but he shortens this story. And what I mean by that is, when the people say he has gone, that means Jesus, at this point, has already gone from that fig tree, the Sycamore fig tree, with Zacchaeus, and gone towards his house. He's at least in process, or even at Zacchaeus' house already. And the people, instead of saying, "Glory to God, he came and he ate with my enemy," right? They start mocking him. He's gone to stay with sinners. And what's important about that, remember the tent idea. If you go to an unclean house, you're unclean. You eat the food at the table, that's unclean. You're unclean. If you stay in the bed, that's unclean. You're unclean. And Jesus does all this. So all the people are like, "What kind of Messiah are you?" And Jesus has this moment. Right when Zacchaeus is there, Jesus has shown great grace. Jesus has emptied himself. And if you think about what's happening, all the anger and bitterness that was going towards Zacchaeus is now up here. He took it upon himself. He saved Zacchaeus when he said, "I'm coming to your house." And all the shame and horribleness that was going to fall on Zacchaeus suddenly gets turned and directed at Jesus. And in my head, when I was a kid and I was told this story, I always thought Zacchaeus, when he says these words, it was like right then and there when he came down from the tree. But actually, remember, they've already gone back to his house. So the most likely scenario is what you would do is it says that he specifically stood up. So what most likely is going on, this is dinner time. And you would kind of recline on the floor and would do these different things when you eat dinner. And in the midst of this dinner, Jesus eating with them. He's proven it's not just words. He's actually came to his house. He's actually eating the meal with Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus is just overcome. And he stands up and he says these words, "Look, Lord, here I give half of my possessions," now he's a wealthy man, that's a lot, "to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody of anything," which is everybody, write it down, "I will pay back 4 times the amount." Now if you do the math, you think about, if you give away 50%, you only have 50 left. And if you cheated anybody, if that's 13% of what you have left, and you give 4% of it away, the math doesn't add up. You're already past 100%, right? Because you did 52 plus 50, and you get 102, and it doesn't work. Well, and if you're like me, you think, what's going on here? You can't actually fulfill this. And what's going on is, in the Middle East, if you really need something, you exaggerate it. You do hyperbole. And so in this moment, he's telling Jesus and the people, there's no way you can fulfill what he's saying. But he's saying, I'm going to do something so drastic and so out there, you know it's going to be true. If he said, all right, here's what logically I'm going to do. Here's what actually I can accomplish. Everybody would go, I just don't mean it. But the fact that he goes this, ecstatic, way over the top idea of how he says it, everybody knows in the community he means what he says. And Jesus in that moment says these words, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. The Son of Man came to seek to save what was lost." The challenge of this story, I think, for all of us, that we don't like to point out sometimes, even my pastor friends like to forget it sometimes, God's also reaching out to the world. And it's hard. That's really, really hard. And it's really hard when you set your banquet for Jesus and Jesus goes, I'm going to go over here to the guy or the girl that is your enemy. Yet Jesus does it because he's come to seek and save the lost. But notice that when he does, Jesus' action is what saves Zacchaeus. the action to take all that shame, put it upon him, and Zacchaeus is overwhelmed to respond. There's a response and a change that happens when Jesus does this. Zacchaeus is ultimately changed. You can tell in the stories ahead that he's not going to just take money from the people anymore. Justice has come to this place. He's going to give a bunch of money away to those that need it, and those he's wronged the most. He's going to give a lot of it back. He's also going to be a different person because of what Christ has done. Because just like the blind beggar, Jesus' grace demands a response. And there is one. As you know, we're going to close in this service with Amazing Grace. It was written by John Newton. You've probably heard this before, but he was a slave trader in his younger days. He actually was on a journey one time, and there was a big, huge storm, and he just said, I got to get out of this. I can't do this anymore. And he fretted for his life, and he actually became a Christian that day. But it wasn't then that he wrote Amazing Grace. It wasn't then that he finally, started making war against the slave trade. It was many, many years afterwards. And he wrote the song Amazing Grace, and even after that, he finally became convicted of the slave trade. And he wrote his thoughts upon slavery, which actually was used by other people in the British Parliament and stuff like that to show the atrocities of what was going on. It was one of the key elements of ending slavery in England. And all that happened because just like Zacchaeus, the arch enemy, the villain, was shown grace by God. And so if you're here today and that challenges you, congratulations, it does us all. But the key to remember is it's God's doing, and what God's going to do is going to ultimately do something amazing in the long run. And if God does show grace to the villain, it may take years like John Newton, but one day God's going to bring about a great work through that person and what God's story has done in their life. And we need to celebrate that. Let us pray. Lord, as we're here today, we thank you. For Lord, it is true that no matter who we are, no matter what we've done, your grace is more sufficient and your grace is more powerful. And so as we're here today, Lord, first of all, as we look at these two stories, forgive us for when we receive your grace and we don't let it transform us. Help us to be like the blind beggar. Help us to be like Zacchaeus, who would allow you to find us, to bring your salvation to us, and change who we are, that we would be like you and show that grace to other people. And as we hear it, Lord, we do praise you through this last song. We've sung it so many times and we've thought about how it changes us and what amazing grace you've shown us. But once again, Lord, help us to be people that also take U-turns. We go up to people who are stuck in sycamore fig trees that the rest of the world wants to hate. To be that grace that should empty ourselves, that Lord, your work and your kingdom can be built. We pray all this in Jesus' name.